Hello, good evening and welcome to True. You are joining us for week 2 of 5 in our Exodus series, looking at how the Israelites tackled similar challenges to what we do or what we are currently facing in lockdown. Now we're going to do this slightly differently. We're going to do this in our groups. So what's going to happen is I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes, then we're going to hit pause, and we're going to ask a question in our group, and then we're going to bounce back, but the questions will appear on the screen. So if you are not in a group at the minute, you can still think about them, muse over them, and click play. Today we are looking at how do we deal with disappointment. You see, what has happened in the story of Exodus so far is Moses has been raised up, he has become the prince of Egypt, he's encountered God, then he has gone back to his people who are currently kept as slaves and said, guys, we've got to get out of here. And the whole of the Israelites would have been like, yes, come on, let's go, like, who wants to be a slave? So he goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go, and Pharaoh says, no. And this goes back and forth, but all the while expectation would have been building for the Israelites. They would have been expecting to get out, to see a brighter future, to have their own land. They would have been dreaming of all of the good that is on the other side of slavery. And I guess at every time where Pharaoh says no, the Israelites would have thought, oh, that's disappointing. How am I meant to process that? How am I meant to move forward with that? So then eventually Pharaoh says, guys, yes, you can go. And so they do, they go. Pharaoh chases after them, they go through the Red Sea, and they get to the desert. Now, if you have spent the whole of your life in slavery and you're told freedom is coming, guys, you are going to be free, you're going to be able to enjoy all that the world has to offer, and you walk through a sea that has miraculously been parted, you're walking through it, you're thinking, do you know what, the other side is going to be incredible, it's going to be absolutely amazing. Oh, can you imagine the food, can you imagine all the grass and the buildings and the view? Oh, the view's going to be excellent. And what happens? They cross the other side and they get stuck in a desert. Their whole life has been dreaming of what is on the other side, and they get stuck in a desert. Now, they don't know this at this point, but they're going to be walking around that desert for 40 years. All of the people who would have left or who would have been adults when they left Egypt would have died, bar Moses. That's big. Can you imagine the disappointment and the pain that they would have felt? And so my first question to you is, in your life, what has been the thing that has caused you the most disappointment? Discuss it in your groups. I hope you had some stories of disappointment, were able to chat about them. And you might say, Ads, I can understand we're looking at disappointment. How does this relate to lockdown? I would say to you that we have consistently been disappointed over these last 10 months. So we were told that the worst was behind us, that we'd passed the peak of the pandemic, and it was in April or March. Actually, we've just had the worst week in terms of death because of COVID-19 so far. We were told that Christmas would be normal and that everything would be back to normal by Christmas. It wasn't. We were then told that we could bubble up over Christmas and we could see our families. We couldn't. You see, disappointment keeps coming. We were actually told that schools would never close again. That would be the priority, that would never happen. A couple of months later, we're back home learning. You see, we have had to face disappointment after disappointment. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at how the Israelites have responded to this disappointment of their hopes, their dreams, their world effectively not living up to their expectations and the disappointment they faced. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at Exodus 16 verse 2. I want to encourage you to read the beginning of the book of Exodus. It's such a good story of God's faithfulness, and we are not going to go over all of it in the next 5 weeks. We're going to miss out so much gold, but we're going to hopefully give you so much gold as well. So Exodus 16 verse 2 says this: "And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, 'Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger.'" You see, what they say, their default position when they get disappointed is they start moaning, and they start blaming the people who have taken them out, saying, "Oh guys, you know, we would have been better had we been left in Egypt. At least we had food, at least we had drink. Actually, who cares that we were slaves and didn't have rights, but actually, oh gosh, it was so good, we had food. Food." You see, their default response is to grumble, to moan, to have a go. It's probably not the best way to respond. And then they respond in another way. If you fast forward through the book of Exodus to Exodus 32, it says this. Now, in this, Moses has gone up the mountain. He is talking to God, and the Israelites are waiting for him. And they say that it says this in Exodus 32 verse 1. "When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, 'Up, make us gods who shall go before us.' After this, Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we did not know what has become of him. So Aaron said to them, 'Take off all the rings of gold and tear that are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me.' So all the people took off their rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" You see, what happens is the Israelites get so disappointed, so upset, that they go to Aaron. And out of their impatience and their pain and their disappointment, they say, "We are choosing not to believe in God. We want to make another God that we can worship." See, these are not healthy ways to deal with our disappointment. And so my question to you is, when you face disappointment, when you face trials, what do you really do to process it? Not what should you do, what is your default? It might be that you grumble, it might be that you have a group of friends and you're just like, "Oh, I'm so upset, this has happened. It might be that you say, "Oh, you know, I'm going to shut it out. Instead of going to God and worshipping him, I'm going to worship my PlayStation or my Xbox." Right, I hope you were able to be honest and true about how you really deal with disappointment when you face it in your lives. So we're going to look at how we probably should respond and how the Bible teaches us to respond. So we're going to go back to the story that we looked at from the Israelites. So in Exodus 16 verse 2, I read to you that they grumbled, that their default position was one of having a go and being annoyed. Actually, there's something beautiful that happens off the back of Exodus 16. You see, let me find it. Exodus 16 verse 2 says this: "And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, 'Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate the bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger.'" The default shouldn't be to grumble and to pop off at authority of the person who's got you there. But there is a key point that even when we do, because let's face it, that's sometimes our default reaction is to moan. That's just the nature of who we are. Is it right? No. Is there better ways to handle it? Yes. But God is still gracious in it. So God's response to this is, then the Lord said to Moses in verse 4, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not." You see, the Israelites grumbled, but what was God's response? God's response was not, "Oh, stop grumbling." Actually, his response was to outpour love on them. He physically made it rain bread. You see, that is how gracious God is that in our failures and our flaws and our shortcomings, he still turns them for good and showers us with blessing and his goodness. I say that to you to let you know that actually we will fall short. I know that my default, is to grumble. And we will fall short, but that doesn't disqualify us from a relationship with God, because God is a gracious God. The other story I told you about the Israelites building a calf to worship. Actually, we can look at Moses and see the lesson that we should learn from them. Actually, the Israelites got frustrated and out of their disappointment chose to worship and build another god. That's not good. That's not right. However, Moses, on the other hand, was up spending time with God. The reason he was delayed was because he was talking to God. You see, so often when things haven't gone our own way, our default position is to turn to other gods. It's to get the PlayStation out. It's to look at Instagram. It's to scroll through TikTok. Actually, our default position when we're disappointed, when things get tough, when things get hard, should be to talk to God, to build a relationship and to pray. Is that the easiest thing to do? No. Is that our default? No. Does it go against the tide? Yes. But when we talk to God, the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God of the universe, who loves us and is for us, when we talk to him and explain how we feel, actually it changes the situation, because it changes our outlook and our posture. You see, I went through probably my biggest story of disappointment in my life, you might have told yours earlier, was when I would have been 17, 18, so some of your age. And I loved sport. Like, I was that guy. I was the sporty man, if you will. That's what I've based my identity on. That's what I found my joy in. Like, that's who I was. I was that guy. I was in the football team, the rugby team, the cricket team, the volleyball team. Like, that was my life. And what happened is I was in my final years. I was top of school, and I walked into a table. Now, you're thinking, a table? Ads. You walked into a table. Your story of disappointment, the most disappointment you ever faced, starts with, I walked into a table. Yes. The table, if you want to know, is the one that is in the Sunday ID room, if you remember it. The wooden one, most tables are wooden. And I walked into it. I was helping out at church and I walked into it. And I got a dead leg. Shock. A dead leg. I then remember I stayed around for a week or so, and I thought, I need to get this checked out. So I went to see my physio, and they looked at it. They did the ultrasound thing on my leg, and they said, Ads. They didn't call me Ads because that's not what they said. Mr. Brennan, you've got a calcification on your leg. Big word. Basically what happened is I got calcium. My leg had leaked a little bit of calcium that was pushing away the muscle from my leg. I thought, okay, big word. They then said, you are not going to be able to play sport for between 3 months to 2 years. Okay? Now, that broke me. I remember walking home in floods of tears because I realised that my last year of school, of all this sport, all the stuff that I loved, where I found my identity and security, got taken away in an instant. I was so disappointed. Every afternoon when I would have been going out to play sport was rubbing it in my face that I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't even able to run on a treadmill because I was in so much pain. But you see, over the course of the healing process, actually God did something significant in me. Not because of my own strength or will, but there was something in it where I got to know God. That was a turning point in my life. You see, out of disappointment, out of pain, out of trials, actually my relationship with God grew. I put things in my things in place in my life which laid foundations for me to walk forward in my relationship with God. You see, He is a God, and it says in the Bible that He works all things together for the good of those who love Him. He's a God who changes bad situations for good. So when we're disappointed, I want to encourage us. One, do you know what? Try not to grumble. If we do, God is gracious to forgive us. There are people who you can talk to and process your disappointment with. Grumbling isn't saying to someone, help me out. Grumbling is just consistently slandering and bringing down, oh, why? Actually, talk about it. Talk to your youth leader, talk to your friends. Actually, how can we get through this disappointment? Secondly, don't default to worshipping other things. Worship the God of all gods and the King of all kings who loves you and is for you, because He can actually change a situation, whereas 3 hours on FIFA can't. Thirdly, I want to encourage you that God brings good out of bad situations. In the midst of it, you may not be able to see it. When I had my leg, I couldn't see the good that was going on. All I could see was pain, disappointment and frustration. But looking back now, I see the faithfulness and the goodness of God, who is able to turn a bad situation around to good, because He's a faithful and just God who loves you. I want to encourage you to, in your groups, to pause it now and to have a conversation. Talk about how practically you can deal with disappointment. There might be disappointments going on in your life right now. Pray together. Work out practically what you can do to keep your eyes fixed on God, who can change situations, rather than looking down and getting frustrated and upset. Guys, thank you so much for listening. I will see you guys soon. Bye.